Well, last week, Deborah threatened that I may be the only one speaking today. And verily, verily, it is so. We are continuing on with, I don't remember what chapter it was. Remember what chapter we were on? In the Science of Mind?
Part 5.
We're in part 5, the Science of Mind. And it is from the teachings of Jesus. So this is part 3 of part 5 in the Science of Mind. In this chapter, which in this part it's quite lengthy actually, and there's a part that I came across called the concept of a successful man. Now I know, okay, I've got to do that disclaimer that I always do. When we talk about successful man, it's not just talking about men, it's talking about all of us. But someday we'll all understand that, and I won't have to say it every week. But here we go. The concept of a successful man. I thought, wow, that's pretty important for us to understand in terms of applying this teaching to our lives. What exactly does that mean? And what does it mean in terms of a successful man from the teachings of Jesus? And I thought, well, this could be quite fascinating. So I really enjoyed working on it this week. Ernest Holmes says, "As much gathers more, as like attracts like, so success breeds greater success, and conviction is attended by certainty. The whole teachings of Jesus is to have faith and to believe. He placed a greater value on faith and belief than any individual who has ever taught spiritual truth." And he goes on to say the cosmic mind is neither wishy-washy nor nilly-willy. It is positive, certain of itself, and sure of the outcome. Are you wishy-washy and willy-nilly in terms of defining what your success is or what you plan it to be? If so, maybe that's why you may not be as successful as you wish to be. The implication is that this is true of our application of law as well. So if we state that which we wish to be in confidence and conviction, we will receive back from the source confidence and conviction in the answer that we wish to receive. And if we state that which we wish to experience in willy-nilly fashion, we'll get back willy-nilly demonstration. Holmes says, "We can forget all about the law and know there is nothing but the word." Now, I thought that was a pretty fascinating quote. We can get all about the law and only think about the word. There's nothing but the word. Holmes spends a lot of time talking about the law, the natural law, subjective law, and subjectivity, and so on and so forth, and the entire process of the whole system of the creative process, and the law being a major part of that. So how would he come up with this idea that we can forget all about the law and know there is nothing but the word? We got to remember that the law is responsive. It's automatic. It doesn't have any opinions, values on what we release into it. It responds according to what we release into it. It is its job to do so. So I thought we'd look at some of the teachings of Jesus and how Jesus used the basic teachings of natural law to describe how to use it. And he used a lot of parables. Parables are basic metaphysical lessons on how to use our thoughts productively. And Jesus was a master of that. He was not teaching us what to think, but how to think. And the reason he used parables quite often in his teaching was because people at that time were not learned it necessarily, they weren't educated, and so they didn't necessarily understand things if you gave them the literal meaning of things, but if you gave them a metaphysical idea of something they could actually apply to their everyday life, they could probably get the point. And so he used parables for that purpose. I think parables are really valuable to us in terms of understanding a metaphysical idea of the teachings. And metaphysical is basically above the physical, above the rational, above the literal. And so it's easier for us to kind of apply the teachings when we can actually relate them to our everyday lives. Remember that Jesus was a human being, who is a spiritual being having a human experience, and we are as well. And so therefore, if he was not able to relay a way for us to understand the teachings, to be able to use them for ourselves, what was the point? For example, in the parable of the mustard seed, Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed. Jesus is describing the fundamental creative principle as taught in Science of Mind. The mustard seed is the smallest of seeds, but it grows into a huge plant. In Science of Mind, we know that the seed of consciousness we plant in a universal law will grow into a real condition, something we can experience. When we plant a seed, we know that it's going to produce a particular kind of plant. I'm growing in my garden right now sweet potatoes and tomatoes and peppers and so on, but I know when I plant those seeds in there, I know that that's what's going to come up if the sun doesn't dry it all out. I know that's what's going to produce there. I was shocked when I cut up little pieces of sweet potato and put them in the dirt several months ago, and now they're taking over the entire garden. The little bitty pieces of sweet potato are taking over the entire garden. I can understand the idea of the mustard seed growing into a huge plant. Whatever I plant in the soil is going to produce after its kind. I also know that when I put the ingredients of a cake together, eggs and flour and miscellaneous stuff, I know that when I put it in the oven, it's going to make a cake. I don't understand how that happens, all that mushy stuff that I put together and mixed together and put it in the oven, all of a sudden it manifests into this beautiful, sweet something that I want to eat. But it does. I don't know the process of that. I just know that if I can study chemical reactions and so on, I wouldn't understand that necessarily, but it's still fascinating to me. But I know it's not a miracle. I know it just works. Jesus also says the kingdom of heaven is like leaven, in which he means, as Holmes says, thoughts planted in mind have the power to chemicalize opposing ideas and leaven the whole lump of subjectivity. In this way, ideas gradually permeate the mind and influence all thought and action. That which we hold in our mind is like leavening, it's like yeast. It's something that causes a chemical reaction to the subjective law and makes that thing react accordingly. Jesus is comparing spiritual law, spiritual activity, with natural law. There is nothing magical or mystical going on in this whole process. Jesus lived as a spiritual being in a human existence. That is the same place in which we live, move, and have our being. Exactly the same condition. It's right here and right now where we are. The same thing Jesus was talking about back in those days is still happening right here and right now, and we still get the same results. So, we could say that success is as natural as planting mustard seeds and baking bread or baking cake. We have a pretty solid grasp of the workings of the natural law when planting our garden and making dinner. But we fail to apply the same laws to manifesting life the way we wish it to be, the life we wish to experience. And it's really quite simple. I believe all the teachings of Jesus were aimed in that direction, to understanding how we could actually use universal law. Creating a successful life has nothing to do with our appearance of nobility or being a good person or having a forthright demeanor or even doing what's right. It simply has to do with obeying and using natural laws, using the natural system to create that which we wish to experience. That's all it is. It's a natural process. Ernest Holmes says, when we learn to put away our petty virtues with our petty vices, then we shall see clearly not what either virtue or vice is, but what truth is. Get down to what actually works and use it. He says the things we need, we are to ask for, and we are to believe that we receive them. It's that simple. He says this plumbs the very depths of the metaphysical and psychological law of our being and explains the possibility of an answer to our prayers. So I'm going to use this parable that Jesus talks about quite extensively in this chapter. It's a metaphysical interpretation of the parable of the prodigal son. You remember that story? There were two sons. The younger son went to his father and said, I'm ready to move out into the world, and so therefore I would like to have my half of my inheritance at this point now so that I can move out into the world and see and create my life. The father automatically says, okay, and gives him his half of his inheritance and sends him on his way. A few days later, he gathers all the things and moves off to a far-off city. And nearly no time at all, he has wasted all of his money and all of his resources. And their big famine comes across the land, and he becomes very hungry, and he has nothing to eat, nowhere to live. So he goes to a gentleman of that far-off country, and that gentleman says, "You can work on my farm feeding the pigs." And so he goes and feeds the pigs, and he's feeding the slop to the pigs, and he can't even eat himself, and he's thinking how nice it would be just to be able to eat the food that he's feeding to the pigs. Basically, he's hit rock bottom. He goes back to his father, and his father welcomes him with open arms and a big kiss and says, "Welcome back, my son." So let's look at that story metaphysically. We can see that story literally, and we can see a lot of, well, it's kind of a cool story. The kid goes off and wastes all his money, comes back, and dad says, "Hey, welcome home." But there's a little more to it than that. And I'm going to use some of the Bible actual verses here. The younger of two sons asked his father for his inheritance. The sons represent everyday man, you and me. The father represents God. You probably got that already, didn't you? This was interesting. God didn't argue or judge the son's request, or let him know that it probably wasn't his best decision to do that, to take all his money and go off. He just agreed and gave him what he requested. That's how the law works. When we release something into law, the law doesn't tell us, well, that's probably not a good idea. We probably don't really want that. The law doesn't argue with us. The law responds according to that which we put into it with faith. Not many days after, the younger son gathered all his stuff and went off to the far country, wasted his substance with riotous living. The far-off country represents a state of consciousness. It's not a physical location. He didn't go off to Orlando, go to comedy shows and drink at bars and stuff like that. He left in a state of consciousness. He saw a separation between himself and God. A conscious separation, Ernest Holmes says, a conscious separation from God, an isolated state, one in which there appears to be no remembrance of God as an actual, living, and ever-present reality, one where man feels himself to be separated and entirely apart from the eternal good. So the story goes on. When he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. When we have isolated ourselves from our source, from our true source, we feel lonely, lost, and in want. Also, in a state of separation, we forget our connection with divinity, we forget the truth of who we are, and seek comfort and support from effects, from materialistic conditions, accepting them as our true source. That's not the truth. Also in this section, remember he was feeding pigs. Remember, Jesus was a Jew, and most of the people that followed him were Jews as well. The Jews consider swine to be the bottom feeders of the earth. They're inedible, the lowest form of life, and he was serving the swine. He was serving the lowest beings on the earth. He even came to the point of wanting to eat the food that they were eating. He was so in need and so much in want. Basically, we'd say he hit rock bottom. He had nowhere else to go. He not go any lower, so therefore it came to him the idea, I think I'll go back home. So the story goes on. He arose and came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father said to him saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. Holmes says, this is the most perfect lesson ever taught by the great teacher. Wow. That's pretty powerful, isn't it? This is the most perfect lesson ever taught by the great teacher. This means that God turns to us as we turn to him. Is it not true that when we look at God, God is looking through us at himself? If you ever feel distance between you and God, remember, it's you who have moved. God can't move. There's no place for God to go, because if God is all that is, wherever God would go, God would already be there. And so God can't go anywhere, but we can move away in consciousness. That's basically what the story is all about. And the father said to the son, or the son said to the father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet. And bring hither the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat, and be merry. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found. And they began to be merry. Notice, the father didn't even respond to the son's humbling statements of, I'm a sinner and lowly, and don't deserve to be your son. The father didn't even respond at all to that. Jesus was showing that God is not judgmental, vindictive, or easy to anger. God is the essence of all good. And the essence of all good knows only good and knows only love. The best robe represents a seamless garment, a complete unity. There is no beginning of the thread or an end of the thread. It goes completely through the robe as one piece. So there is no beginning and no end. It's the eternal reality, like as God is. God and man are one, intertwined together. The fatted calf represents the abundance of God's love. It is the Father's goodwill to give us the kingdom. It is up to us to receive. Now, we didn't talk about this part before, and this is the part where quite often the story ends. We think, well, that's really nice that God received the Son back again, or that the Father received the Son back again. Well, I like this part because I think it's probably maybe even more relevant to our application of the story, where the elder son comes back and he says he's seeing that the Father's lavished his Son with love and food and gifts and great celebration, and he was angry because he had remained at home and worked faithfully on the farm, but the Father had given him nothing. The Father assured him, though, that he was also loved and was also heir to the kingdom. The elder son had never thought to ask for more. That's a valuable part of the story. So we think that the younger son ran off and had a riotous life and he was forgiven. The older son should have therefore received more accolade because he was a good son. He had stayed home and done what he was supposed to do. The truth is, the younger son asked for his good and received it. The older son never asked in the first place. So Holmes says, both sons were foolish, but it is a question which was the more deluded. Isn't that fascinating? So, getting back to the topic of the successful man, how do we apply this story? We see the story illustrating the importance of holding in consciousness that which we wish to experience. The younger son asked for which he wished to experience. The older son did not. The younger son received what he wished to experience. The older son did not, but he didn't ask for it. Knowing our system of belief is the only factor keeping us from all our good, we see the story playing out in several different ways. Success is a personal level of achievement. God has no opinion and certainly no desire to limit personal good or personal progress. In fact, God as source cares only to express itself through us. The more expansive we are, the more God is expressed. We can never really be separated from our good. We can never really be separated from our source except in consciousness. It's a valuable teaching, is it not? Jesus wasn't the only religious leader to teach this. In fact, all founder religions and all founders of founder religions are based on the idea of oneness. Oneness with all that is, oneness with God. Buddha sat under the tree and he realized that detachment to things creates suffering. Attachment to things means we have created a physical atmosphere around us, which there's beginnings and endings, and my place ends where yours starts, and so on, and having to do with matter and physical materialism, and so on. And so he realized that our attachment to stuff actually creates suffering and pain. And release from our attachments relieves the suffering and pain, because we are one with all that is. There is nothing and no one which is separate from us. We're all interconnected with all of life. In Hindu teaching, Krishna was riding as charioteer for Arjuna, the great warrior. And Arjuna didn't want to go to war because he saw people who were his friends and family on the other side, and he didn't want to fight anymore. Krishna told him that it was his duty in life to do that, because if he didn't do what is his to do, then the whole world would fall out of sequence. The whole world would fall out of balance. And so if he didn't do what was his part, the world would be chaotic. And so therefore he must follow that which he was supposed to do. Each of us has an integral part in the allness of life, in the fullness of life. Each of us has an equally important part as a cog in the machinery of the infinite. And so therefore, if we don't do our part, it causes an imbalance and a bit of chaos. Muhammad sat on a rock, and he realized that man was separate from God, or Allah as he called it. And he realized that the only cure for that was for man to realign with God. Remember, religion means to tie ourselves back to the original source of our good. And so Muhammad taught that we needed to reconnect with God. Moses, of the Jewish faith, went up on the mountain, and he saw the burning bush, and the burning bush, as the voice of God said, "I am that I am." Very powerful statement. I am that, and I am that, and I am that. And all that is, I am, including you. We are all interconnected with God. Zarathustra, the founder of Zoroastrianism, went on the mountain, and he realized that the powers of good and the powers of evil were constantly at battle. And after he thought about it and meditated on it, he came to the conclusion that in the end of times, there will be a battle between the powers of good and the powers of evil. And the powers of good will win, allowing all of us to live in a state of heaven, which is where we all were in the first place, before we got this dualistic idea of separations. Lao Tzu, the author of Tao Te Ching and the founder of Taoism, says, Tao is all. We can never be separated from it. Even opposites are parts of the same spectrum. Everything that appears to be opposite is not separated, it's all part of the same spectrum. So we have the teaching of Zen. Shang Yi of Confucianism and the author of I Ching demonstrates how all the aspects of life are intertwined and work together for our good. And when things are out of balance, because we're not paying attention to different aspects of life. It's a fascinating study. So we can see here that through all the spiritual teachers of the past, separation is what inhibits our success. It's like a centrifugal energy idea, that if we get too far from the center, we begin to create a wobble, and it causes disbalance. And the more we focus ourselves and get ourselves back to the center, the more life seems to go at a steady pace and easily. Unity ensures wholeness, alignment, and balance, and also ensures success as a result. The successful man is one who recognizes themselves as one with all and sees all life working in their favor and working together with all. And the successful man is one who knows to use natural law effectively. And so it is.